I can't. He couldn't basically believe that Boris Johnson didn't take his recommendations and take them seriously. He's watered it down and said, no, oh, well, thanks for that, but...
And don't forget, the person who wrote the report is a pretty open-minded gentleman, right. The kind of guy who, during a transport crisis, actually decided to windsurf in a pinstripe suit and bowler hat to work
I didn't know that.
On the Thames. So a pretty open-minded gentleman. Now, anyone who's watched Priti Patel being interviewed... who knows, who's got any handle on the facts, will instantly spot her lack of knowledge, her lack of affability, her lack of taking of responsibility. Does that remind you of anybody?
Yes, it does remind me of a certain person who's running the country.
Correct.
But I think
So birds of a feather, perhaps.
Mirroring, the law of attraction.
And let us look at that. Let us look at what else happened in the news. There was I don't know his name, bless him, but apparently there was a very highly thought of junior politician who was up for promotion. And there was a little scandal that he had to go to court over and was completely exonerated, but apparently Carrie Symonds had given evidence against him. Do you think he was promoted?
Obviously not.
Correct. Boris Johnson blocked it. Now, completely exonerated, right? And yet, he won't sack someone who has been found to have broken code in a very responsible position.
I'm going to use a silly example now. I mean, I'm just bringing it back to back to basics. I remember as a very young boy, I was I was 9, 10 years of age, going into being a teenager, and I was questioning my dad, working 16 hours a day or 15 hours a day, running a few restaurants with his brothers, and there he was in his Mercedes. There was 6 packets of empty cigarettes in each part of the doors. He was coming home. He was drinking his half bottle of wine during lunchtime at 3 o'clock. He would have a bottle of wine in the evening when he's coming back at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. And I would say, as a very naive young boy that I would say, Dad, why are you drinking so much? Dad, why are you smoking so much? This is not good for you. And the answer I would get is, do as I say, but don't do as I do. And I think the fact that we are in the 21st century and the fact that the media is now 24 hours, has been for quite a while, it's not a new thing. Social media has taken over, so we now have false information about everything. We know about everything before it's happened. There are rumors creating fact before it's even happened. It's absolutely ridiculous. We know everything before it's happened. Yeah, that's the point that we've got to now. And you see people of many different ages now, all they're doing, and I was flying quite a lot until recently, and all people are doing is looking at their Instagram, Facebook. That is their way of passing time, which in itself is worrying, but that's another conversation. Then you've got people like Cummins who are supposed to be behind the scenes, who are supposed to be the ones organizing, planning the strategy, not to be seen, who actually goes on 2 separate occasions to whatever the details are. Let's not go into the micro detail. Visiting, going to a castle because of his eye testing and bringing his kids to his sister's house when he had COVID. It doesn't matter. But clearly, I use the example with my father as a simple example. Going back to basics. People know what is right and people know what is wrong. If you put rules in place and you're asking 60-odd million, or let's take away the kids, so you're asking 40-odd million adults to follow these rules, you're telling people to not earn their living anymore. You're telling people to not have their liberties anymore. You're telling people to lose their independence, barely go shopping and stay indoors, basically imprisoned in your own house and, God forbid, in your own flat, which is even worse if you don't have a garden and so on. And yet you were the one that created the rule and have recommended to the Prime Minister to follow through, and yet you can't follow that yourself. And now, second time round, you're expecting people to abide by these rules. People are not stupid. And I find that insulting at the very least. And to stand up there and go, oh, by the way, the R numbers come down to 1.1. And people explain to you what that is based on a PCR test that is not even reliable. It's worrying.
It's not applicable.
It's I speak to my mother who's 74. Very, very lovely lady, common sense, sees life as it is, very straightforward. And she says, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I just can't believe what I'm seeing. Not only is this criminal, you are taking away people's livelihoods. You are taking away people's ability to earn a living for themselves, for the future of the country, for their families predominantly. And yet you stand up there, and going back to Priti Patel, if we can sort of rein it back in, when she was standing up there, and the reason why Boris Johnson's not used her anymore is because she wasn't convincing. You're absolutely right. She wasn't affable. She wasn't likable in any way. She seemed nervous. She seemed, to me, if you profile somebody just from their look, from
aggressive.
I can do that from 10 minutes of seeing somebody. I get a good feeling of what they're about. And she seemed like a control freak, aggressive, defensive. And you can only imagine what she's like behind closed doors when she's in charge.
If you look at her, even when she's smiling,
and she looks frightening.
It's a crooked smile. And she's so tense.
She's not sincere,
No.
and not sincere either. And so you can just make a quick opinion, as we all do now, because of pictures. We make an opinion based on what you see on a screen, whether a small screen or a big screen. And if you just take that simple 6-minute opinion on somebody who cannot even deliver a daily press briefing, and they've removed her because she can't actually do it. Can you imagine what she's like in normal operation?
Well, she's Jordan Peterson's classic stereotype of disagreeable.
But I think Boris Johnson, I think this is only a feeling that I've got from speaking to a lot of people, as I've said, travelling a lot as I do. People in Britain, more than any other country in Europe, in my humble opinion, are very forgiving. Too forgiving. And they've given, even with Cummings, I think people are not happy about it, but they've kind of said, you know what, these things happen, and because of the current crisis, maybe Boris can still get away with it in his tenure as Prime Minister. But this, with Priti Patel, could really, really backfire. Because bullying hits a lot of people. A lot of parents have their kids being bullied. They've been bullied at work and maybe have not reported it. And believe me, this hits a lot of people.
20%. 1 in 5 kids at school are bullied.
And how many
boys,
at work?
Boys more than girls, apparently. Work 1/3. 1/3. Now, bullying is... Now, I've written lots of reports for post-traumatic stress, but with bullying, we call it prolonged duress stress disorder, where you feel all control has been removed from you whilst at the same time feeling highly anxious, if not very, very scared.
And what that does to you, from, as I said, from personal experience, what I did when I was, you were bullied as a kid. So again, I'm not here to play the violin, but I was bullied as a kid for 18 months. Horrific, but got over it. So that was 30 years until the next time I was bullied, which was a few years ago now. So there was about a 25-year gap between being bullied as a child and being bullied as an adult. First thing, it brings out everything that you went through when you were a kid. Mm-hmm. So everything that you've never probably solved or solved completely or talked through and had proper, I would say, therapy, which I didn't have, rose back up to the surface. And secondly, the effect that had on my relationship with, thank God that it was strong enough, and Hannah became my wife not long afterwards, is amazing. It affects everything you think and everything you will probably not do, because you will then feel worthless. So you will not maybe take a small risk. You will not maybe open that business or invest that money or even walk down the street.
You can't, because it colours your entire perception.
Absolutely.
Because what happens is you stay with what I call a processing block with chronically raised stress hormone cortisol. And that leaves you chronically aroused. So some people feel anxious all the time.
So is that if in layman's terms, would that be very twitchy?
Yes. Well, twitchy,
sort of.
Exactly, jumpy even. So some people can't...
Paranoid.
Well, let's focus a little bit. So some people can't even take loud noises, and they call that hyperekplexia. From the Greek word ekplexi, which is surprise. They can't sleep, they can't concentrate. They avoid stimuli likely to trigger recollection. So some people can't even face going to work.
But also it makes you very, very unsociable.
Avoidant.
You withdraw from society.
Correct.
I remember when I was bullied, as an adult, you suddenly avoid crowds. You avoid anything where there's huge amount of interaction. You can only cope with one.
Well, your confidence goes, you see.
Of course it does.
And also, some people suffer from emotional numbness, so you're right, they can't deal with relationships either. Some people suffer from nightmares. Some people suffer from flashbacks, which is like video clips of certain things going on that were associated with a trauma.
And how can I say this politely? It affects you in the other department as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you lose your confidence, the physical part of the relationship is also affected.
And also, don't forget, and research has shown this very clearly, that raised levels of cortisol, what did I say before? The main cause of death and disability in the Western world is stress. Stress is mediated by cortisol. Now, as a child, of course, it directly interferes with your self-esteem, and that then directly reduces the likelihood of success in life. Because people have found that success in life is highly linked to self-esteem. Therefore, that's one of the reasons, not the entire reason, that's one of the reasons why psychopaths are found at the top of career ladders, because they have artificially raised self-esteem. Now, of course, there are other reasons they're at the top of career ladders as well, because they can be disagreeable, they never take responsibility for failures. Does that remind you of anyone again?
He seems to be coming back. In fact, there were rumors I don't know, again, these are rumors in the press, which is even more worrying than when the inept government uses the press to leak out information like, oh, by the way, I thought it was so farcical, it was so insulting when a few weeks ago the UK government was using the press to say, oh, no, we are avoiding every possible... we're avoiding it at all costs to have another lockdown. By the way, we don't think we're going to have another lockdown. We don't want to have another lockdown, which was the simplest level 1, novice level reverse psychology of, by the way, we're having another lockdown. We're getting you ready for it.
It's the usual. Will you stand for Prime Minister? No. Well, I mean, only if I'm forced to, really. And
I heard the rumours were, that actually Boris Johnson, and I don't know, this came from a junior minister who works very closely with the senior ministers in a cabinet, that he's actually had enough. He's actually tired of his job, was not enjoying it.
They never do. They never do. I had
quite quickly within the first few months. Yeah.
One of my patients who is no longer with us, unfortunately, he was a grade A celebrity. And he would keep on being invited to Chequers to have tea with the prime ministers, and one of them was Gordon Brown, and the other one was Tony Blair, and both of them hated being prime minister. Sherry Blair apparently loved being first lady and was trying to force Tony Blair to stay prime minister as long as possible. But you know what? Why Tony Blair wanted to leave? He wanted to leave to make money whilst he was still young enough to enjoy it. That was the reason. Going back, therefore, the other problem with this corona nonsense is that politicians are entirely self-serving. So they do that. One of the attractions, shall we say, is the avoidance of responsibility by leaning on science. We are following the science. How many times have you heard that? We are following the science, which apparently is SAGE. Which apparently are Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty. And I actually put a formal complaint to the General Medical Council about Chris Whitty. Why? Because during the Parliamentary Select Committee, SAGE said our role is to advise just on corona and not on the wider effects of lockdown. But then how can Vallance and Whitty stand in front of the national media and talk about the danger of corona without mentioning anything else at all? It's like prescribing medicine without discussing the side effects. It's like sending someone to surgery without getting them to sign a consent form.
Can I add to your point?
It's tantamount to assault.
Can I add to your point? On one of their last briefings, they were using old data they admitted afterwards was actually incorrect and actually amplified the position that we are currently in, making it look worse than it actually is.
And you know what the General Medical Council answered back to me? They actually sent me a letter saying, "Oh well, we can see your point, but." we don't get involved in politics. I'm not asking them to. I'm asking them.